In this video, we're going to be going over two main things. The first being a whole brain plan. We're going to do a whole brain plan. And in doing so, we're also going to be going over how to add field and fields and how to cool a plan off with field and fields. So to get started, first you should have the very minimum eyes and lenses in order to do a whole brain plan, but I would also suggest adding the brain to use as a target. So first we need to insert our plan. I already have this brain contoured, so I'm going to use it as my target. I'm going to create a new reference point and choose a true beam for our machine. And usually for whole brain cases, you want to choose 6x. I would say almost always you want to use 6x for a brain. Okay, so if you already have this brain contoured, when you insert your plan, it'll throw the isocenter right in the center of the brain, which is usually what we want, so we'll go ahead and leave it there. The first thing we need to do is choose our gantry angle. So what we want to do is we want to have a flat beam right behind the lenses. Okay, we don't want any divergence going through the lenses, which I'll show you here in a bit. So to get that flat beam, we're gonna set our beam's eye view to F1, which is our only field right now. I'm gonna rotate this gantry until my lenses over here are right on top of each other. So if we look at these lenses right here, as I rotate, you can see they pass over one another. So we want this right lens to be right on top of this left lens. Okay, so about right there, they're right on top of each other. Then we can add a DRR. Can add an MLC and start drawing our field. Okay, so you're gonna want to have about 2 cm of flash on above the skull, behind the skull, and in front of the skull. And the bottom border on a traditional whole brain, you're gonna want to put between C1 and C2. So if you look here, you can see C1 and C2. Usually you can really see that that posterior process back here. You want to put it right in between C1 and C2. Okay, so something like that. Then we can start drawing our field. So I usually start at the front, and you want to come down, and you want about 1 cm of space at least between your brain and your field edge, but no matter what, we want to cover our lenses. So you might have slightly less than 1 cm right in this area, just to make sure you're covering those lenses. Otherwise, we want about 1 cm from the brain or from the base of the skull. So if we turn this brain off, you can see that base of the skull really easily, right? So we want about 1 cm from that base of skull area and or your brain contour. And then right when you get to the spine, you're gonna just come straight down in front of the spine and all the way around. Okay, and that's your field. So then if we go look here, it just depends where you hit your MLCs. Obviously the MLCs are not a perfectly straight line, right? But you just want, in general, you want that perfectly flat beam surface right behind those lenses, okay? If your gantry is wrong, then you can have a situation like this, or or this. So we're missing this right lens, but divergence, we're diverging through that opposite left lens. We don't want that. Or if you just leave your gantry right at 270, you're missing more of the right eye, but diverging into more of that left eye. You don't want that either. So you just want that nice flat beam right behind the lenses, and you can kind of use your axial view to make sure you have that flat beam behind the lenses along with your 3D. As long as those lenses are on top of each other, you'll have that flat beam edge. Okay, so we have our right lateral built. Now I can right click and oppose this field. We now have a left lateral. I shouldn't have to redraw that block. I can just rotate so that my beam edge up here matches. Okay, so it'll oppose at isocenter. Okay, so you just need to rotate this one up until that beam edge matches and is nice and flat behind those lenses. Okay, so we have our beams made. We can add our prescription, which is usually 300 times 10 for whole brains. And we can calculate. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is make sure your dose distribution is symmetrical. And most of the time it will be, as long as your head was simmed fairly straight. See, we have, a spot at 105 on each side. This hot spot's right in the center up top. So it's very symmetrical, so we don't need to adjust our field weight. But I will still change my total field weight to 1, but I'll leave it at 50-50. Okay, and so usually for plans, normalizing so that 100 covers 95% of your target is about what you want, but you can see when we're normalized like that on a brain, our plane is kind of cold. We have this big hole, this big cold spot right in the center of the brain. We don't want to have that. So what you can do is you can either normalize this way or just use your plan normalization value. So if you do it this way, you can put maybe 99% in there, hit apply, you can see that cold spot starts to go away. Something like that, or you can just, change this value. Okay, you just want to cover the whole brain, the whole field, or as much of the field as possible by that 100% line. The other thing we're going to do is come over here to isodose levels, turn all our 3D lines off, but we're going to leave, I usually do the 107, so I usually turn my 107% line on. I change it from contour to segment, and I like this green color. Okay, so my goal usually when I'm 3D planing is to get rid of all the 107. Not always possible, but it's usually a good goal to have. So that's going to be my goal for this plan. So what you want to do is you want to normalize so that you're covering the whole field or as much as possible, but you still feel like you can get rid of that 107. So if I go too low and cover my entire field with 107, there's now no way I can get rid of all that 107, right? I would be blocking the whole field, which is counterproductive. You don't want to have to block your whole field. It won't work. You want to always make sure, if your goal is to get rid of 107 or maybe the 110 or whatever you want to turn on in 3D, you need to make sure there's space left that you can leave unblocked when we start adding our field and fields. Okay, so this looks pretty good to me, so we'll leave it at 97. Now we can start adding our field and fields. So the purpose of field and fields are to even the dose distribution out across your whole field. So if we look at this plan, you can see in the middle, right here, we have this big hole where there is not 107. So if we look at that area right here in the middle, basically what's happening is this is the thickest part of the head, right? So it takes 171 monitor units from each field to give a good dose distribution. So we're giving our prescribed dose, but there's no hot spots or no cold spots. It's the right amount of monitor units for this particular section of the head. But over here in the front and in the back where it's thinner, you can see the head is thinner there. It basically requires less monitor units in those areas to give the same dose distribution. So basically we need to, all these areas covered by 107, we need to deliver less monitor units to those areas than we do here in the center. So the way we do that is create field and fields. So if I right click on F1, I can create a new field and field. Okay, so what it does is it creates a copy of F1. It automatically selects the MLC for me. And what you want to do is start blocking out that 107 area. Okay, so I'm going to use this button right here, select MLC leaves, to select only the leaves I want to move. So I'm going to choose the leaves in the area that I can block that 107 with, and I'm going to use both sides here. Okay, so I'm going to come about to the middle of the field and select those MLC leaves again. Then you need to use your shaping tool to draw a line where you want those MLCs to go. So we want them to block this 107 like that. Then from the other side, I'm going to block this 107. So it'll take some experience to get used to, but if you turn your line to segment in 3D like we did, you can get a little bit of depth perception. So you can see this line right here that I'm drawing on. This green is towards us. It's on this right side of the head. Okay, so we're drawing a line right there at that green. And then what you see, this darker spot is on the other side of the head. Okay, so it's kind of a concave volume of dose, right? So I'm going to only focus on the line closest to me for this side. Something like that. And then from our other field, F2, we're going to, take care of that dose on the other side of the head. So I usually do one at a time, and 3% is usually a pretty good starting point when you're just learning to plan. So now what's happening? So if you remember, both fields were about 171 monitor units, right? But what we've done now is we're telling this open field here to deliver 166 MU, but for 5 or 6 MU, we removed 5 or 6 MU from that field and are now delivering it from this field, which keeps that cooler middle area open, but now we're blocking that hotter outside, okay? And that's, you can see, it's starting to cool those areas down, right? That's what we want. Let's do one from the other side now. Same thing, select the MLCs you want. Start blocking out that 107 from this side. Same thing from this side. And we have a few specs of 107 here. I'm going to go grab them. You have to be a little careful though, because essentially we're traveling through colder spots to get to those hotter spots. So after we add this, we just have to double check the dose distribution in that area to make sure we're not causing any cold spots. So if we look at our dose distribution, it still looks pretty good. That 100 line is covering practically the whole field, which is what you want. and we'll just keep going back and forth till all that 107 is gone. You need to always use this lock tool right here. So if you don't do that, and if I type 3%, it's taking a little bit of weight away from every field, okay? And we want to keep all these field and fields that we're creating at 3%. So if you just click this lock up here and then unlock that initial field, then you can start adding weight to your field and fields. Make sure you remember to click apply and then calculate. You can see every time we do this, it's slowly cooling that plan down. Getting closer. Okay, it's always a good idea every few field and fields that you add to just double check your dose distribution. Make sure you're not getting any holes or anything like that. Everything looks good. Looks like we need maybe 1 or 2 more. Okay, that's pretty good. We have a few specs, you know, above 107 still in there, but that's perfectly fine. Usually you for sure want to get your hotspot or max dose below 110. And then my own personal goal is to get rid of all my 107 if possible. Okay, so this dose distribution looks pretty good. You can see we've evened it out. Now pretty much the whole brain is getting somewhere between 100% of our prescription and 107%, which is much better than what it was before. Okay, so that's how you do field and fields. That's why you add field and fields. You can see we now have all these beams. So the last step, so we're going to right click. Whoops, no, we're going to come up here to planning, and then we're going to merge all these fields together. So what it's going to do is take all those field and fields and just combine them into one field. Okay. Now you have one right here that says new carriage group, which I'll explain here in a second. Okay, you can see it merged those together. This F1 is basically back up to that 171, 172 mu that it initially was at. It's just now not all those MUs come from that open field. Now you can see as the delivery happens, it's going to incorporate all those new MLC shapes that we added. Okay, but you also have these two fields. So why did this F2 not merge together with our other field? It has to do with the carriage of the MLCs. So if the entire bank of an MLC needs to move in order to incorporate your MLC pattern that you drew, it's called a new carriage group, and it just won't merge with your new field. Usually it's because you move an MLC more than 15 centimeters. So if I moved any of these MLCs, which it looks like these top ones I did, so if we look here, this is 5, 10, 11, 12. So we start at 12 cm, and then I added 13, 14, 15. So I added slightly more than 15 cm of travel. So that's going to cause this whole bank MLCs to have to move slightly, or the whole carriage has to move. And when it does that, it just won't merge with your initial field. It's perfectly fine though to leave that as is. It doesn't matter. We can leave that alone. At this point, this plan is ready to go. We would relabel our beams, get it ready for approval, get it approved, and then we can treat it. If we look at our DVH, our lenses are getting pretty low dose because we have them completely blocked by both fields. We don't have any divergence, adding dose to one lens more than the other. This is a pretty typical shape for our IDVH, and you can see our brain is very well covered by 3000.